Thank you very much for coming today to attend our second lecture. It's not loud enough. To attend our second lecture in the celebration for the Philosophy Club, anniversary of the Philosophy Club. Today we have a very famous member of the department. You probably have already heard or seen him before. He gave a very interesting talk about his book not so long ago. The subject of the book was, I have to read it because it's a longer title for me, it was about Hegel, Sartre and the alienation of human being. You have to read carefully. It doesn't say the alienation of the human being, but the alienation of human being. So I find it quite interesting because I have the feeling that Dr. Gavin is on the way towards manipulating, fabricating, investigating something concerning human beings. So you have to be really careful, and the subject today is not just about alienation. He has also indicated to us that he has plans to work on transformation. So it started all out with the alienation of the human being. The next step is the transformation, and maybe that the cyborg is already a transformation, one of the steps of the transformation. The next thing is the transformation of philosophy as such. And I don't know where it is going to stop. But I think we are very eager to accompany him on his path and see what will come out of it. Today, as you know, the subject will be the cyborg and posthumanism, and I think this will be a very interesting talk given by one of our youngest members of the philosophy department. Dr. Red joined us only 2 years ago as a postdoc fellow, and now he is an assistant professor, so he is very fast moving, and you are lucky to see him today because you don't know where he will be tomorrow. Thank you very much for it.
Oh good, it works. It'd be something if I talked about cyborgization and the microphone didn't work. Anyway, thank you very much, Stefan, for those remarks, shall we say. And also, before we start, I'd like to thank Safina Assad for her organisation, for the balloons, for all the posters that you've seen, for the posters itself. It certainly was interesting this morning walking into university to see my poster everywhere, which I was not expecting. And thank you very much for all attending. You've given up your lunch hour, so to speak, to come and hear me speak about something called cyborgs, and we'll see how it ends up. Anthropocentrism, or the idea there is something unique, usually rational thought about human being that distinguishes us from other entities in a way that makes us fundamentally important for existence, has a long history, philosophically, theologically, politically, and ethically. While Copernicus challenged anthropocentrism through his decentering of the earth and hence human being from the centre of the cosmos, his lesson was slow to disseminate throughout all areas of thinking, with the result that thinking continued to maintain that human being has a special place and function within the earth and universe. The past 150 years or so have, however, seen explicit challenges to this remnant of anthropocentrism, and in so doing, whether explicitly or not, has extended Copernicus's revolution through two particular ways. The first, through Darwinian evolutionary theory, which shows our intimate connection to animality, thereby undermining anthropocentrism's claim regarding human exceptionalism. And secondly, Freudian psychoanalysis, which challenges the idea that the human is fundamentally rational by suggesting that human reason is not only based on an unconscious, but that this unconscious is instinctual rather than rational. To Copernicus, Darwin and Freud, recent thinking under the title Posthumanism has suggested a fourth, which maintains the division Descartes establishes between human being and machines is breaking down to the extent it is no longer possible to talk about the two in fundamentally distinct terms. Importantly, however, while previous conceptions of the human-technology relationship recognize that human being is intimately connected to technology, insofar as we use technology to get things done, posthumanist accounts go further and insist this relationship has intensified to the extent that the practical distinction between machine and organism is receding. Rather than hold a strict separation between human being and technology, or the organic and the machinic, this strand of posthuman theory emphasizes that the two exist in a dialectical relationship, wherein the ontological structure of each is altered by its constitutive interaction with the other. In other words, the organic is becoming mechanized, and the mechanized is becoming organic. Or as Donna Haraway puts it, our machines are disturbingly lively, and we ourselves frighteningly inert. As a consequence, it suggests we have become, and are continuing to become, cyborgs. While Catherine Hales traces the advent of posthumanist thought back to the Macy conferences on cybernetics in the 1950s, I want to suggest the defining foundational text of posthumanism is in many respects Donna Haraway's 1987 Cyborg Manifesto. In this text, Haraway posits that such is the dominance of technology, informational flows, and cybernetic systems in contemporary society that the human being is no longer merely organic, but is also part machine. She goes on to play with the notion of the cyborg as a way of overcoming the binary oppositions between, for example, self and other, and human and technology, she suggests continue to plague our self-understanding. As a consequence, she concludes, we are all chimeras, theorized and fabricated hybrids of machine and organism. In short, we are cyborgs. It is not correct to speak, therefore, of fundamental distinctions between the human and world, the human and technology, or even the human and animals. The notion of cyborg, part human, part machine, allows us to capture the techno-human hybrid we have become, and for some at least have always been. With this, Haraway exemplifies a major strand of posthuman thinking, entailing a radical reconsideration of the relationship between technology and human being. Exploring this further, we can say there are two principal ways in which this rethinking occurs. One that moves through semiology, the other more radically through ontology. Those coming from a cultural studies, linguistics, literature, and/or computer science background tend to look at the cyborgization of the human being semiotically. That is, they tend to argue that the human being is intimately connected to, indeed, even constituted by meaning, and in particular, information flows conducted through specific codes. Perhaps the most famous of these is the way in which human genetic material is codified as DNA/RNA to be studied. With this, the human is reduced to a sequence of code capable of manipulation and alteration in much the same way as a computer is founded on computer code. Change the DNA sequence and you get a different human, in much the same way that if you change the computer code, the computer runs differently. There are other examples, though, such as the way information technology has come to play an increasingly crucial role in fostering and developing a sense of individual and collective self-identity. There are many ways in which this occurs, but one of the simplest is through the development of cybernetic virtual networks such as, Facebook, MySpace, or LinkedIn. As you're aware, these networks allow individuals to participate in virtual worlds and create virtual online identities that can interact with others. Individuals can look for employment, friends, acquaintances, colleagues, and others on a global level. Whatever use is made of these virtual networks, the point is that technological developments have created an increasingly virtual world that exists alongside and frequently shapes and interacts with the actual concrete world. Indeed, for many, not only is their actual world dependent on their virtual world, but it is the virtual world that comes to define them. For example, think about how long you can live without checking your Facebook or email accounts. Personally, my students can't go more than an hour, but maybe you're different, no? Another strand, primarily dominant amongst those coming from engineering, technological studies, and biological backgrounds, goes beyond the idea that the meaning of human being is intimately tied to technology, to suggest that technology is shaping the very ontology of human being. That is, it is coming to shape the bodily structure of human being to an unprecedented degree and type, which in turn shapes its possibilities and the meaning it attributes to itself and its world. This ontological strand suggests, for example, that on one level this already occurs insofar as vaccines alter our physical bodies to make them less susceptible to certain diseases, while more simplistically and commonly, glasses enhance individual vision. On the other hand, and more radically, genetic engineering offers the possibility of altering the genetic code of individuals in ways that do not occur naturally. For example, genetic engineering could be used to switch off the gene that causes certain cancers, or it could be used to increase muscle mass, change hair or eye color, or enhance cognitive capabilities, while stem cell research offers the possibility of growing regenerative cells to be used to cure a range of ailments in living individuals. There's also the case of the scientist from Warwick, my old alma mater, who implanted a sensor in his body that hooks him up to the network in his house, with the consequence that as he moves throughout the house, and as long as the light in particular rooms is lower than a certain level, the house automatically switches the lights on. As he moves throughout the house system switches off the lights in the rooms he leaves and immediately switches those on in rooms he moves into. The point is that not only has he shown it is possible to upload oneself to these networks so the two exist in symbiotic relationship, but in so doing has shown this model cuts electricity consumption. As a side note, perhaps this is one of the ways to cut Egypt's energy problems. Rather than cut shop or restaurant opening times, we should implant this device in all of us, thereby turning us all into cyborgs and hook us up to a giant sensory grid. As we move through parts of Cairo, street lights will magically turn on. As we move out with those areas, they will magically switch themselves off. Perhaps. While this shows one potential use of this relationship, at a theoretical level, it is important to note that this ontological strand is not homogeneous. For example, there are those who have come to be termed transhumanist posthumanists. It's a horrible term, but what can we do? Such as Nick Bostrom, who take a very positive view of the possibilities inherent to posthumanism. For these posthumanists, posthumanism offers the possibility of not only presenting an alternative view of human being, one aligned with social and technological developments, but also actually gets us to radically think about how to improve and develop the human being to overcome perceived natural limitations. While these thinkers point towards concrete examples such as cochlear implants, artificial skin, and machine hearts and lungs to show the current ways in which the human being is becoming machinized, they aim to go beyond this by positing that technological developments offer the possibility of, for example, overcoming the aging process and strengthening the human body so it is impervious to aging and disease. In a sense, these strong posthumanists truly want to alter human being to such an extent that what comes after is radically distinct from what we currently understand by the term. In contrast, so-called weak posthumanists take a different view of biotechnology that can be split into two camps. On the one hand, there are those who admit the benefits of cyborgization, but are cautious about it and so advocate it be limited to aesthetic or medical concerns. In contrast, there are others, such as Francis Fukuyama, who take a far more skeptical and conservative approach to the issues of biotechnology and technologically enhanced human being. The criticisms voiced by these bioconservatives typically involve political concerns about how the world would function if certain individuals were genetically enhanced while others are not, socioeconomic concerns regarding access to biotechnology, cultural issues regarding the type of society that enhanced dependence on biotechnology would entail, biological questions regarding the impact biotechnology will have on evolution, and philosophical questions regarding the ontological assumptions underpinning the strong posthumanist position. While the field is crowded, with each side raising a number of issues, questions, and critiques, I want to suggest that irrespective of which side you come down on, we can come to some sort of conclusion regarding the originality of the posthuman framework. More specifically, I want to suggest that by looking for that which unites the disparate posthumanists, we can identify a posthuman framework based around a renewed engagement with technology and an attempt to overcome the binary logic that pits human being against the world, to show that posthuman theory does offer us something original that can help us understand what it is to be human, and link to this the world we are embedded within. Primordially, therefore, posthumanism asks us to re-examine and rethink what we mean by human being, and in particular to question whether the long dominant notion that the binary opposition between human and world continues to hold, if indeed it ever did. In their place, Posthumanists tend to argue that human being is embedded in a socio-technologically constituted world, and that the human-world relationship is fluid and dialectically entwined. The conclusion drawn is that the apparent separation between the human and the environment is invalid in the post-human era and therefore needs revision. In other words, there's a fluid dialectical entwinement between the human and his world, in which the human shapes its world and its world shapes the human, that anthropocentrism has failed to recognize. Furthermore, while defenders of the human world division are able to maintain technologically inspired changes to the body do not impact on the ontological structure of the human being, because they maintain that the essence of the human being, whether this is the soul, consciousness, or the mind, is other than its body, posthumanist accounts insist that human being is embodied and socio and technologically constituted, emphasizing the embodiment of human being and recognizing that technology is not simply instrumental to human being, but is substantial to it, allows posthumanist accounts to replace strictly instrumental accounts of the human-technology relationship, in which human being uses technology for its own ends, with an account that recognizes this relationship is far more fluid, entwined, and complicated than the anthropocentric view realizes. While human being, technology, and world can be distinguished conceptually, this distinction is really a false one. In actuality, they are entwined. Truly understanding the human-technology-world relationship requires we rethink how we think about technology, the world, and the human's place in the world, in combination with a relationship between all these aspects. We will, of course, have to see whether this leads anywhere, but posthumanism at least asks us to challenge previous understandings of what it is to be human and consider alternatives. For example, it asks us to once again re-engage with important questions such as what do we mean by human being? Does the human have a defining essence? And if so, what is it? How do we and how should we function on a daily basis? What ends should humanity aim for? How should we react to illness and fragility? Should we attempt to overcome all forms of difficulty and struggle? Or is it that the struggle with and against failure and difficulty is what defines us as humans? While these are all questions, posthumanism breathes new life into them by challenging us to examine them through the lens of contemporary biotechnology. This brings me to the second innovative aspect of the posthumanist framework, its view of technology and the role technology plays in the world. As Keith Ansel Pearson notes, it is posthumanism's recognition of the scale of disorientation and displacement created by the impact of computerization and the concomitant rise of new forms of engineering and new modes of knowledge that differentiates it from alternative accounts of technology. With this, Ansel Pearson uncovers a fundamental posthumanist theme. Contemporary technology is fundamentally different to previous understandings and forms of technology, both in terms of its essence and relationship to the world. While it may be objected, technology has always been part of the human world, thereby ensuring the human world has always been, in some sense, technological. What the posthumanist framework critiques is the idea there's a fundamental cleavage between the human world and technology, with the latter being simply in the former. Posthumanism wants to overcome this strict opposition and show that, rather than being in the human world, technology is, if you like, the constitutive essence of the contemporary human world. In other words, for posthumanists, technology is constitutive of the very fabric of contemporary human existence in ways it was previously not. This leads posthumanist accounts to emphasize the ways in which technology shapes and constitutes the human world as part of its overall effort to show technology is fundamental to the very substance of contemporary existence. But posthumanist accounts also maintain that what we previously meant by technology no longer holds. In other words, posthumanist accounts challenge us to rethink the categories in, on, and through which we discuss technology. To do so, they implicitly maintain technology has tended to be thought in cold, sterile, static, and mechanized terms. However, posthumanist accounts insist this view of technology no longer holds because of alterations to the scientific outlook that recognizes the world as more holistic, organic, and complex than previously thought, and developments in engineering capabilities that allows machines to be created with greater cognitive and functional capabilities. The conclusion reached is that modern technology has become and is becoming more fluid, organic, self-determining, adaptive, and human-like. For example, alterations in computing technology have allowed the development of so-called smart computers that do not require human control to function. If you've ever been to some major European cities, you'll experience driverless trains. But it also already runs in some medical procedures, central heating systems, the development of emergency response strategies, and perhaps more controversially, militarily, where the development of so-called smart bombs and unmanned drone aircraft with automated weapon systems mean that to varying degrees, certain weapons are capable of acting without direct human input. Importantly, however, while this process has started, posthumanists tend to go further and maintain this is only ever likely to intensify until machines, or what we now know as machines, acquire mental capacities comparable to those we recognize in humans. Whether we fully agree with these descriptions of technology's newfound essence, I think we have to take seriously posthumanism's insistence that the essence of technology is malleable and can no longer be thought of in cold mechanistic terms. Posthumanism makes us aware of the need to re-engage with what exactly we understand by technology and what impact we understand it can and should have on human being and the world we exist. But while the general posthumanist framework brings to our attention often ignored aspects of human being, namely its constitutive relationship to technology, and can allow us to rethink the philosophy-science relationship, this is not the only disciplinary boundary challenged by posthumanism. The posthumanist framework also raises a number of questions that can only be answered through a deep and sustained engagement with politics and ethics. While the semiotic train of posthumanism tends to focus on the cultural implications of posthumanist thought and tries to give content to this framework by engaging with science fiction, with the consequence that the same films such as Blade Runner, Terminator, Star Trek, and The Matrix are discussed again and again. And those coming from the sciences tend to focus on technological developments as a way to rethink and alter the human. Both tend to downplay, in a way that I want to suggest is rather fateful for our concrete lives, the way the posthuman framework in general is intimately connected to politics and ethics. We must realize, however, that such is the intimate relationship between human being, technology, politics, and ethics, that thinking this political ethical component must not simply be tacked onto posthumanist attempts as an afterthought. We must recognize that in much the same way that posthumanism breaks down the barrier between philosophy and science, it also requires that we break down any barriers that may exist between philosophy, science, politics, and ethics. While the posthumanist framework challenges previous conceptions of what it is to be human and the relationship between human being and the extended world, it also asks us to rethink how we should act, which technology should be permitted and encouraged, how resources should be allocated, to what ends biotechnological research should be employed, and to what ends we think human beings should be directed towards. These are political and ethical issues, and as such must be put at the heart of posthuman attempts to rethink human being. Admittedly, there has been some movement in this direction in recent posthuman theory, with, for example, Francis Fukuyama appealing to an essentialist ontology to argue that biotechnology threatens to violate the factor X that makes us human and may also lead to a range of negative unintended consequences. For example, the biotechnology industry's attempt to control or slow the aging process to enable individuals to live longer fails to take into consideration how advanced age impacts on the individual. Fukuyama points out that people grow mentally rigid and increasingly fixed in their views as they age, and try as they might, they can't make themselves sexually attractive to each other. Worst of all, they just refuse to get out of the way, not just of their children, but their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. The result may be social stagnation, youth unemployment, and in general, a culture unable to take into consideration and or keep up with international, technological, and economic changes. With this, Fukuyama suggests the attempt to slow the aging process, a goal many of us would instinctively approve of, has a number of hidden, unexpected, and potentially undesirable political, ethical, and evolutionary consequences. Importantly, however, Chris Gray reminds us that posthumanism is not a politically or ethically determined framework. It is politics that will determine what values we build into posthumanism. In short, Gray asks us to rethink questions including, what end do we think human beings should be directed towards? Should we aim to prolong human life indefinitely? What should medicine's purpose be? Should we aim to structure life so it's devoid of struggle and negativity? And what role do we want technology to play in human being? These questions lead him to offer a multi-perspective analysis of the potential political and ethical issues that arise from contemporary biotechnological developments. For example, Gray notes that the internet played a crucially important role in fostering and sustaining the 1996-97 revolts against the Serbian government's attempt to ignore legally elected government officials. We may also point to the way in which the virtual world was used to coordinate the real-world protests that culminated in the removal of power of the Ben Ali regime in Tunisia and the Mubarak regime here in Egypt. Or the way prosthetic developments are breaking down the division between fully able-bodied individuals and lesser able-bodied individuals. Indeed, it should be noted that cyborgization permitted a Paralympian to compete against fully able-bodied athletes for the first time in the 2012 London Olympics. While this coming together starts to break down the division between these segments of society, we have to recognize this division is not only philosophical and political in nature, but also revolves around philosophical, political, and ethical concerns regarding what it is to be human. How do we and how should we treat lesser able-bodied individuals? What separates the two segments of society? And where does the line between the human and cyborg lie? Which points to the philosophical question, what is it to be human? As such, and rather than take an apologetically celebratory position regarding the post-humanist framework, we must, I think, recognize that biotechnology has potentially devastating effects. For example, genetically modified foods have the potential to unleash new vaccine-resistant forms of disease and/or impact on local habitats in unforeseen ways. Gene therapy treatments raise a number of ethical questions, including, are these procedures based on informed consent? Will everyone have access to these therapies, or just the rich and well-connected? Will insurance companies use genetic information to discriminate against those with bad genes? At what point does the quality of the patient's life override the desire to simply keep him or her alive? Indeed, in his Politics of Life itself, Nicholas Rose points out that cyborgization has political and ethical implication for education and educators alike, insofar as it is not clear what we are to do and how we are to treat students who have the monetary resources, desire, and capabilities to improve their cognitive capabilities through certain drugs or more radical means as these become available. A process that will put them at significant advantage over others who do not have the resources to purchase these products or procedures, or who, for whatever reason, simply don't want to. While sports have long opposed artificially improved performance amongst athletes, cyborgization means these same questions will become more fundamental to the educational discourse.